Just like last week, we need to remember the culture that Peter is writing to is very different to our own. This is a society that doesn't have government support or independent legal systems. There's no such thing as fundamental human rights. And the people that Peter is writing to are in an extremely vulnerable position within this culture. That's why Peter starts by focusing on slaves and wives, those who are most vulnerable, and then finishes with husbands. Many of the wives Peter is writing to are women who follow Jesus, but their husbands don't. And this puts them in a very difficult situation for a number of reasons. Firstly, not following the family religious practices might be seen as being rebellious. Secondly, if Christians are being persecuted in their community, they might bring unwanted public attention on their household. And thirdly, if they were sent away from their household, or even if they left voluntarily, there was no support network for them to rely on, and they would most likely end up as a slave in another household. So Peter's focus here is on encouraging these wives to be good witnesses to their husbands, to demonstrate their love and submission to his household authority, so as not to feed any resentment towards them or an unnecessary barrier towards their Christian faith, and in fact to attract them to the gospel with the way that they live. Now, this won't be achieved by dressing up attractively. Anyone can do that, but by showing the beauty of the gospel at work in their hearts. Just like last week, many people have used passages like this to condone domineering behavior and abuse towards their wives. And in fact, many churches have used passages like this to tell women to remain in abusive relationships. Now, both of these are wrong. They misunderstand why Peter is giving these instructions. Unlike these women, we do live in a society that has legal and social protections for women escaping abuse. And at New Life, we are committed to supporting anyone who is experiencing abuse and helping them to be safe. If you or someone you know is in this situation, speak to someone you trust and ask for help. If you feel unsafe, there is help available. Now, Peter then goes on to address Christian husbands. Unlike the society around them, Christian husbands are to treat their wives with consideration and respect, as equals and fellow heirs of God's grace. Now, this instruction even comes with a warning that their prayers may be hindered if they fail to love and honour their wives. He then shows that in the community of believers, whether slaves or free, wives or husbands, we are all equal in God's sight. And we have a mutual obligation towards one another, to love and care for one another, to show compassion and empathy. Now, it's worth considering how revolutionary these instructions were for people in this culture. But then comes the biggest bombshell of all. Don't repay evil with evil, but with blessing. What? Don't fight back? Don't get even? How is it even possible to live like that? But of course, this is exactly what Jesus did for us, as Peter showed us last week. And it's also just what Jesus asked his followers to do in Matthew 5. He said, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbour and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven." You see, this is what it means to live as God's chosen people. Now, Peter finishes this section by quoting from Psalm 34. This is a passage that shows that this has always been the standard expected of God's people. And just because times are tough, or you're being treated unfairly, that doesn't mean the standard has changed. But what has changed is that we now have Jesus as our example. And it's his life inside of us that makes this revolutionary new life possible. But that doesn't mean it's easy. Why do you think that the call in verse 9 grates against our natural instincts so strongly?